Yeah, that's right, folks. It's happening. This is Rick, and we are talking about Bob Lazar, my literal opinion on him, his story, and a lot of things that associated with it indirectly. Talking the talk and walking the walk, right? When I have watched probably a couple dozen videos by now with Bob Lazar in one form or other, interviews, other people's video takes, some fairly well-known ones, some old ones, some that I'm, just common everybody Joes like myself. And this fella here, I don't know his name, but he come up under physicist when I googled physicist, so he must be a famous physicist. And I noticed that a lot of detractors and some supporters of Bob Lazar like to point out that the man does not talk like a physicist. Well, let's be clarification. He has a master's degree in electronic or in electrical systems and something hydro something or another. So he claims to have these. I mean, we have no physical proof because the actual information has been removed from the higher places of learning where he says he attended, and he himself has not produced a diploma or plaque or paperwork or anything that can support his claim other than his apparent knowledge. And I've acknowledged in the previous video that potentially that could be self-taught, that he's a very sharp and intelligent individual, probably, but not quite genius level. He shows a lot of working knowledge in things that interest him. And yet he doesn't seem to talk like a highbrow physicist or highbrow academic sort, which gets me to thinking, what exactly does that mean? Does that imply and suggest that somewhere, someplace, that these folks, this being a Bob Lazar and this guy here being some really high level physicist, have a different language from the average Joe? Well, yeah, they have understanding of a lot more technical terms and technical jargon, if you will, and would apply that in house amongst talking to their peers. Maybe. But does that mean that all of them have to talk like Sheldon? So far off course that majority of people, unless you're not in that little clique, simply cannot understand. Now, in case you're not aware, when I was going to college, I picked up some extra books, and one of them was an encyclopedia, like a big technical dictionary for scientific and technical terms. The thing was about 5 inches thick and weighed about 20 pounds. And I don't know if I still have it or not. The book's pretty snappy on my shelf. And there are words in there that are almost a paragraph in length. They run 40 or 50 characters and are so incomprehensibly difficult to pronounce for myself and my already convoluted, dyslexic tinged ability to try to pronunciate what is in my head. I know what I think I know, and trying to get it out and make it sound like it's supposed to sound is a real challenge. So I understand that these people of higher learning with these higher degrees and diplomas and academic structure and background and training, etc., have a lexicon much greater than what the average, you and me and the majority of people would be able to comprehend. So amongst themselves, they may talk that way. And then again, even then, wouldn't that feel like it's being a distraction? Why would they not talk like normal people? Like, they just talk to talk. And they talk, a discussion gets into some very technical material. That's where things start to become a little shady or gray or questionable for many people when we're talking about Bob Lazar and his background. So it says when he does interviews, he doesn't talk like a physicist. And make the argument again, exactly what does a physicist supposed to sound like? How is their verbiage going to be different and highly noticeable and suspect to us Joe and Jane Q public? If those same physicists give a lecture to the public, do they not tone things down, or do they keep talking as if they're talking to Sheldon from that Big Bang? I mean, I have video watched a number of these physicists giving lectures and other commentary over the past two and a half weeks, just so I could get a taste of it. And I will acknowledge that they do use some highbrow $5 words. And what I mean by $5 words, if you've ever had to have something printed, I remember that it cost $1 a word, a letter, or something like that. So when it came to printing my full name on a book back in the 80s, it would cost almost $21 extra just because of the length of my name. So you are going to limit yourself when you go up in public, and you're going to try to talk on the level of the people you're around. If you're going to try to talk over the heads of people who are asking you questions or trying to give you a serious interview, or well, you're not going to be understood. And I see this in other cases. I've seen this in other videos. Acronyms is usually where we come into an issue, where they fire off so many acronyms that, and then they have to explain what those acronyms are. We recognize some acronyms, FYI, for example, or LOL, for example, CIA, for example. But then there are others that we don't truly fully understand or apply differently from what we think they are. And if a person has to stop every 5 minutes or 10 minutes during an interview or a lecture to explain that, that becomes problematic and not so germane to the topic of the material. So, to find that Bob does not talk like some highbrow physicist, which he's not, in the aspect of his education, he does not have a PhD. So he is a physicist from a master's degree. But his choice of language is probably a big part is because it's who he surrounds himself with. He doesn't, from what I can see, does not spend a lifetime of academic pursuit. He does not work at a big university or a major corporation, think tank, or research facility. So he's not surrounded by would-be peers and would not be in a position to talk like them on a regular basis. This would lead to either disjointed conversations, so we hear him talk about things that are a little above board the average lexicon, and it makes him sound smarter, and it shows that he has knowledge of word and terminology that many do not, and that he's trying to find a way to convey them in a way that the people he's talking to will understand. So he goes out of his way not to talk down to people from that perspective, in my opinion. On occasion, we see that he seems to falter or slip when he's discussing his story with the highly educated, from what I understand. Now, I personally have yet to see a video of Bob Lazar and a bunch of other master diploma PhD physicists having a debate or a constructive conversation of any kind about anything, whether it's hydrogen cars or it's rocket powered bicycles or photographic, developing photos or reverse engineering alien technology. Have you seen one of these videos? Because if you have, put it in the post below. Let me know the link where I could go, and I'd like to see it myself. I'm just saying, if you see it, you know it. I don't see that. So his majority of his world is surrounded by normal people, not so heavily educated people. So he's going to talk like them. He's going to talk, in my opinion, it makes perfectly good sense, since he is not the personality type of a Sheldon. He is not so obsessed with technical form. He wants to understand what his project is, or his process is, or what he's doing, and he tries to coach it in such that you will have an easier understanding of it. And that leads me to believe that he does have an access to a physicist's vocabulary and a physicist's lexicon and verbiage. He just chooses not to use them because it would just muddy any interview and conversation he has. He actually agonizes occasionally in some of those videos when he's trying to explain a formula or theorem of why something does something. And doubly so when he's talking about something, when he talks about the technology that he was dealing with, or he claims to have been dealing with at S4, because he acknowledges over and over again that this stuff is so advanced, or so outside the accepted standards, that it's hard to get your mind around it, even when you're looking at it full on and you're working with it full on. Now, so let's see, my third point. How many scientists are absolute? That they rebel without thinking, and anything that doesn't match their view or understanding of a thing. Think about that. How many of these highbrow scientists, these physicists, are so locked into their view, their understanding of whatever the topic is, their understanding of technology, their understanding of how energy works, their understanding of what's for lunch. It's so absolute that they will not bend and are not capable of comprehending or the idea that somebody else doesn't exactly see how they see it. Once again, Sheldon in the Big Bang Theory show it presents that as his character presents that often, where he tries to talk to somebody about something he believes his view of string theory, for example, and is so on the money that he is absolutely, without a doubt, unequivocally correct, and you are. And if you don't agree with what he's got, he doesn't have time for you, or he gets irate, or because he can't cope with the fact that you don't see it his way. So a lot of people are quick to dismiss in the scientific field. Part of scientific process is to work with and understand and get repetitive results from something. But sometimes when you're talking theory and a technology that just rebels against anything we know, our system, our understanding of dynamics and physics and energy flux and what have you, as they come across something that just absolutely does not fit into the square peg, or the peg does not fit into the square hole properly, they just can't deal with it and they want to dismiss it outright. You run into that a lot. There are some that will eventually come around to their thinking, but you have to bring them to your view and not expect them to be following your view specifically. And this is problematic in a lot of highbrow, highly educated, somewhat narcissistic individuals. I see that in politicians all the time and in corporate leaders all the time. You simply cannot understand the majestic understanding that I have that you will never understand. So get away from me, you peon. So moving on to the next point. So when they say he doesn't sound like a physicist, he doesn't talk like a physicist, I ask again, how are physicists supposed to sound? How often have you found yourself holding a conversation with one? Be honest. When I look at these other websites, these other YouTube channels, and these detractors of Bob Lazar, the man, and his credibility, if you divorce yourself from the questions around the legitimacy of his education, and we take the literal assumption that that is the truth, and that he did have that education at those places, it doesn't matter if it was at that particular place, but he did gain this higher level of education, and that in that aspect, he does talk a little bit like he has that higher level of education. But because he's constantly surrounding himself with people who've never been to that level of academia, he tends to talk like they talk. He tends to try to coach his responses in methods and forms that would be understandable and easily interpreted from those who lack the extra information he has. So we're back to the detractors. The detractors will say that's the problem. See, when he gets actually confronted with other physicists, other people of academic knowledge in his fields or similar fields, that he seems to have struggled with trying to talk to them. Well, if you spend the lion's share of your life around somebody else and you don't actively move in those fields, he's going to have problems, in my opinion. You would have problems discussing these things if you're not in that field. And if you're not surrounded by those coworkers or other people of that interest on a regular basis, he does not have that connection. So he talks like he talks to normal people because that's the majority of the people he's around. And then the absolute of somebody who sits there and wants to debunk this guy. It wants to be the skeptic of this guy. So absolutely everything he says is absurd and a lot, or a falsehood, or misinterpreted, or etc. Or. Well, okay. To those people, How many conversations with physicists have you had? Have you sat down in a room full of physicists and listened to them debate something? Now, some of you will have done that, but the majority of us will have not. And probably a good significant percentage of people who say they have probably have not, because we have a tendency to want our side to be prevalent. We want to believe, or we want to disbelieve. We want ours to be absolute. And I'm not going to be absolute. I try hard not to be absolute. While I would like this story to be 100% true, and I believe that quite a bit of it is true, I'm not going to point out that it is 102% definite, because I personally was not there, not in a position to have any of that working knowledge. I can 100% agree with something, and I get into some pretty heated debates and interesting debates with some people who don't agree with me on the concept of absolutes. Once again, a suggestion, or as an example, we talk about the concept of absolute zero being zero. And I bring up, as we know it, and they get upset. No, absolute zero is absolute zero. Until we prove that something else comes along that says that we can actually be colder than absolute zero. Because it's not absolute, because maybe there's some sign of what have you, right? And then I'd just be an abstinent or argumentative or stupid, depending on who you ask, right? So, reserve the right. Reserve the concept of somebody who talks the way you think they should talk, not talking the way that you think they should talk, until you have actually put yourself in a room full of them and listened to them talk to each other. Because from the videos I've seen, most physicists talk like everybody else. They just have an expanded vocabulary. They have access to acronyms and verbiage that you and I do not have, or we have very vague connections. We'll hear something and we may be able to connect it to what we think it is, but we can't be 100%. We sure are not confident enough to get involved in that conversation at that level of $5 words. Well, Bob Lazar is not in that situation. He works by himself. He works for himself for the most part. He is not in academia. He is not in the corporate world where he works in a little room in a little circle of people who all have their own language and jargon. So as I said, so my point is at point 5. Many skeptics are quick to point out this problem, that he never sounds like a physicist, or rarely sounds like a physicist, yet how many of them have held a discussion, right? Like I said, how many times have you talked shop with somebody? How many times are we going to sit there and we're going to ask, the truth of what we see things, and not somehow or another weigh it down with absolutes or what have you? So, is he talk like a physicist? I guess it depends on who you ask. Majority of people would seem to say no. My belief is that he talks what he talks because he talks to the audience he has, which is mostly regular Joe people and regular people who have an interest or dabbling, and of course the people in the UFO world and the things associated with it, which from everything he talks about, his reluctance to talk, so to speak, in some aspects, shows that he's got a bigger verbiage in the UFO field than we give him credit for, because he's exposed to it more than he wants to be. His verbiage and his lexicon of language for his academic career is acceptable for what he does and what he needs to do with it. I think it doesn't matter at the end of the day whether or not he talks like what we perceive to be a high-level physicist or high-level mucky-muck in his field. Of course, that's just my opinion, and you're more intended to welcome to yours, and I'm more than happy to hear any kind of anything you want to say in the tags. Just tag it, bag it, share it. Keep an open mind when it comes to how do people sound and where do they talk. And think about that. How many people do you know in your world that fit into a certain niche or environment or career path and have an access to a language lexicon, verbiage that you and I don't usually use because we don't work in that? I'll use my own personal experience as an example. Because I work in waste management disposal, And yes, that's a thing. I actually have a little card that says I'm a waste disposal technician according to the Waste Reclamation Authority of Polk County, Iowa. And for what good it is, I don't know. I've never had a time where I needed to pull my card out and wave it at somebody saying, "You let me look at your trash." Well, in my case, I pump and dispose of restaurant kitchen wastes that are put down the drain. These things called grease traps, GTs as we call them as an acronym, and ITs or interceptors, which are a very big cesspool or very big septic-like concrete box that's put outside that your plumbing all routes through, being the idea that fog, fats, oil, grease floats, and solids, that's everything else that gets shoved down the sink that shouldn't have, will fall to the bottom, and you'll have a layer of gray water at a specific percentage or less that makes it viable. The idea being is the gray water flows through and goes on out into the sewer system while the fog remains, and the fats, oils, and grease are not getting into your sewer pipes and clogging your streets. Because I'm telling you, I've seen pictures what that looks like when that happens, and I've seen firsthand what that can look like. And you'll find that every toilet in your neighborhood suddenly stops working because somebody's got a log jam somewhere, and it takes somebody to come out with a big fancy truck that looks like a giant vacuum to clean that section out for them. I just go to the restaurants and hospitals and businesses that have cafeterias and preempt that from happening. So we pump out their GTs and their ITs. And sounds complicated, sounds sophisticated, but I tell people I pull greasy or narky water out of a box, and they're satisfied with that. So, does that make me somehow some fancy technical word for a grease guy? Hence the term of the channel, the grease man cometh, right? Until next time, my friends, keep an open mind. And like I said, if you have anything you don't agree or you want to share, by all means share. Please click the like button. Not that it really matters, because I'm never going to get enough people on YouTube that care, and so on and so forth. Take it easy. Have a good day.